I just got a load of feed in today and I thought it would be the perfect time to let you guys in on my secrets to feeding these horses.
Oh, Nigel, gross, buddy. Nigel.
If you've been watching for a while, you know that Nigel and Frisco Bill have a few teeth missing, so they get a little bit of a special mixture. Ziggy is still getting a little bit different of a diet than the other horses because he has some weight that he still needs to put on and some muscle to gain. But for the most part, after these horses go through their rehab and they've gotten to a good place, they basically get the same exact diet. I think there is a really big misconception out there about how you need to feed a regular horse. A lot of people spend too much money on supplements they don't need. I have spent years trying to perfect the diet for my horses, and I think it's pretty simple and it keeps me very organized. Since I think it is really important to know how much horses cost before you buy them, I am going to tell you how much it costs me to feed all of my horses.
Girl. What are you doing? Hey, girl. Come on, drink.
Tiny has really been enjoying the gigantic stack of hay that I got a couple of days ago. During the winter, most of my horses will be on a straight alfalfa diet. The horses that are a little bit easier to keep weight on will continue to get some of this grass hay. A few of you asked what exactly this grass is, and here is an orchard grass head. And then I believe the rest is a meadow brome grass. Very low in protein, very low in sugar, perfect for an easy keeping horse or one with metabolic problems. Horses naturally like to be chewing on something for most of the day, so the base of my diet is going to be a forage. I am lucky enough that in the summertime I do get to turn a lot of my horses out onto a nice pasture. But for today, I'm just going over what I feed them when they are getting all hay. Here is what the alfalfa looks like. I'm going to break it down for you guys so you know how much it costs to feed one horse for the year. Most of my horses are going to be a little bit less than 1,000 pounds, but that's the number I use to calculate their feed requirements. Each horse gets about 20 pounds per day of their forage, which equates to 3.65 tons per year per horse. The hay I got this year, I paid around $150 a ton for, so each horse costs about $550 in forage for the year. I thought the easiest way to show you guys what exactly the horses are getting fed right now is just to take you along on my evening routine. I do have to clean Scarlett's round pen, so I'm going to turn her out in the little arena for a few hours. She honestly has been kind of a turd about getting caught lately. I think I've gotten her to a place where she's too smart. She usually isn't bad for me to catch when she's in the round pen, but when I bring her back in at night, she tends to want to stay in the smaller arena and just play around. I really do like to wait until my horses are around 4 years old to start them under saddle, but a horse like Scarlett needs to be mentally engaged, so she's going to get worked but not actually ridden for a good deal of time this winter. Recently, she's also been a little bit squirty going in and out of the door, so I just go back and forth until she can calmly go from one space to the next. I did get all of this alfalfa a few days ago, and I think it has gotten her a bit too much energy. A lot of people do not like to feed alfalfa because they think it makes their horses hot, but it really does have a much higher energy profile than grass hay, so sometimes if your horses aren't getting out and getting worked or growing like Scarlett, they will be a little bit on the fresh side. Since most of my horses do get a fair amount of turnout, I don't really notice a difference.
Honey, come on.
Since I did just get this hay, I'm still in the process of switching all of the outside horses over to just alfalfa. I'll probably go through all of the hay outside on the trailer as I'm mixing these two together. Just to give you an idea of what 10 pounds looks like, this is 10 pounds of the grass hay. If you've never weighed your hay before, it is a really good practice to get into if you want to see exactly how much your horses are getting. Unfortunately, the battery is died on this thing. I am pretty good about guessing these days since I've been doing this for so long. The alfalfa that I did get in is very dense. It's just very compact, so it looks like a small amount, but it is a little bit more heavy. I've been trying really hard to get all of these horses their hay in a bag this year. The longer I can stretch out their hay, the better it will be for these horses. Most of these guys are not worked hard at all, so they really can't have truly free choice feed, otherwise they will gain way too much weight. Typically these hay bags will last them until their next meal, so they do have food available to them at all time, but it's not a complete smorgasbord. Since I know a lot of you guys are probably going to ask, these nets are from Hay Chicks. A lot of these I've had for a number of years. They are super handy to fill up and they've got a little clip on them I can move around if the horses go from the stall out into a dry lot for the day. They also have a string you can tie them to something with if that is what you're wanting to do. The only time my horses do not get their hay in a net is if they are missing a bunch of teeth. Frisco Bill just gets his hay on the ground. He's been having a lot more trouble eating it lately. This is just some leftover ground up bagged hay that I was trying. It's alfalfa, but it really just looks like a bunch of little hay splinters, and Frisco doesn't really care for it much. He does, however, really like this hay that I just got. It's super easy for him to shake out all of the leaves and just vacuum them up. This summer he was really not looking as good as I was wanting him to, and part of it was I did run out of this alfalfa sooner than I had expected. These giant hay bags are a little bit of a tight squeeze in my cart. I've got 3 that I'm taking out to the boys right now. It is around 4:30 in the evening, so I do have to get going on my chores a little bit. While Scarlett is in the smaller arena, I am going to pop in here and clean up all of the turds she left for me the last couple of days. I've got her dinner all secured. If you guys have been watching my channel for any length of time, you know that I am kind of obsessed with turds. Horses poop a lot. It's about 1 pile for every 2 hours that they're out. It's pretty important to keep their guts just moving along. Normally, horses are very susceptible to lots of different types of colic, and the best thing you can do to prevent that is feed them the appropriate amount of forage and get them access to clean, fresh water. This past year, I have unfortunately had a few instances of colic. In the spring, Studman did have colic that we believe was from some excess sand in his gut. I haven't had any problems with him since then, so I think we flushed it all out. Whiplash also had a pretty serious colic very recently. He was impacted, and I think that may be due to the fact that he has a tooth that is not quite right, so maybe he wasn't chewing everything as good as he should, and it got into a really big ball in his hind gut. Thankfully, everybody is doing great now. Whiplash was on a round bale when he colicked, and I decided just to not get any more of those. There's just too much opportunity for the horses to gorge themselves and eat too much, even if I am using a slow feed net. I also really like to keep track of exactly how much these horses are eating so I can dial in their diet if they start losing or gaining weight. For the horses that cannot eat regular forage, I do make them a mash. This is my favorite kind of pellets. They're just straight alfalfa. They don't have any binders or anything to make them stick together. While I was restocking all of my horse feed today, I did get some tube sand to put around Nigel's new little run-in shed. They are calling for some wind tonight, so I do want to get these set up before I leave for the evening. In addition to the normal pellets that I get, I wanted to try out these bigger size Bermuda and alfalfa pellets. Sometimes, especially in the winter, there does seem to be a bit of a supply problem at the feed stores around here, so I like to have a backup just in case the pellets I like to use are not available. I don't think I've ever shown you guys inside my feed room, but it is very basic. All I have are a few little trash cans with each of the different feeds in them. You guys are always so generous about sending me gift cards to buy feed for little Nigel. I was having to drive about 2 hours to go pick up feed, but they've just opened a new store that's way closer to my house. This is pretty exciting because I'll save a lot of time. The one thing that I cannot get anywhere locally is the ration balancer that I like to feed my horses. I've been feeding this for a very long time. Frisco Bill has been on it most of his life. This stuff is made by Buckeye Nutrition. I cannot find it anywhere in Montana, so I have it shipped to me through Chewy. This stuff is awesome. It has a really low feed rate and it is manufactured in a warehouse that does not do any other types of food, so there is no chance of this being contaminated with a lot of the things that will kill horses. Most of my horses will get 1.5 pounds of this a day, which is significantly less than if you were feeding a typical horse feed. At $300 a year, it is really reasonable to make sure your horse doesn't have any holes in their diet. I've tried a lot of other ration balancers and I just like this one the best. It is specifically formulated for horses who are on a mostly alfalfa diet. For this basic diet with the hay and the ration balancer, it is around $850 a year to feed each one of the horses. Of course, that will be less for most of them because they are getting out on pasture. Ziggy heard me banging around in the feed room and he thought it was time for dinner, but I'm going to make him wait a little bit longer. The ration balancer makes it really easy to feed a large number of horses at once. I'm just going to load up my little wagon with some more hay for the horses in the dry lots. And then I'm going to bring my bucket of ration balancer and get everybody fed all at once. I'll give you guys a close-up of this feed. It's in smaller pellets that are super easy to just break apart with your fingers, so even horses that maybe don't have the best teeth can eat this. This stuff works for the majority of the horses that I get in. The NSC on this feed is a little bit higher than what you would want if you had a really tricky metabolic horse that you were feeding. This company did start producing one recently that is less than 10%, which is great if you have a metabolic horse. This company also makes a really good full replacer pellet, which Scarlett got when I first got her. It is probably part of the reason she has grown up to be such a pretty horse. As you can see, even on this very basic diet, Scarlett has visible dapples in her winter coat. Pretty hard to do, but this is one of the signs that let me know I am on the right track with the basic diet that these horses are on. These guys have been waiting a little bit longer than normal, so they're pretty excited to get to their dinner. I was having a hard time keeping them in line when I was setting up my camera.
Hey, come on. Hey. Boys. Stop it. Okay, boys. Come here.
If you've ever tried to feed horses in a pasture type situation, you know it can be a real pain in the butt. Thankfully, once these horses get to know the routine, they are pretty sensible around feeding time. The one horse that still gets very excited about ration balancer is Little Gus. He is basically the first one to eat every single time, and he needs to investigate every bowl just to make sure there's nothing extra special in one of them. This can be a pretty common behavior in horses that get fed, but maybe there's not enough resources to go around to everyone. He looks like he might bite your face off, but he really is a very sweet horse, and I've never had him actually try and bite me. One thing that I did not mention in their regular diet is vitamin E and salt. These are two things that they have available to them. Salt all the time, 24/7 in blocks. The vitamin E I do give to the horses during the winter. Every single horse that I've ever bought from an auction in Montana that I've tested does have a vitamin E deficiency, and I think that just comes from them eating hay for the majority of the year. When horses aren't out on pasture, there's a good chance that they're going to be deficient in vitamin E. This is the stuff that I really like to use. It's high quality, it is natural. However, I have found that the horses do not like the taste of it and they will go off their feed. The next best type to use is this natural powdered vitamin E, which can be hard to feed the pastured horses because it just blows away in the wind. Most of the time in the winter for these horses, especially the ones that are eating in a herd setting, I will just use this vitamin E that is available at Costco. Horse people can get a little bit on the snooty side when it comes to the proper vitamin E to feed. For me, whatever the horses will eat is what I'm gonna buy. There's no sense in me buying the most expensive vitamin E when the horses are just gonna turn their nose up at it. The capsules are super easy to feed. I just toss them in their feed pans and they kind of eat them up along with their grain. They don't blow away in the wind and the horses barely even notice they're there. Typically, I don't have all of the metabolic horses separated like I do now. Goose, Big Gus, and Studman do require a lot less calories to stay on the plump side, so I may stop giving them their ration balancer. An alternative to the ration balancer would just be a vitamin and mineral supplement. This is something that I already have available. I put it in Frisco and Nigel's mash. It is a lot less calories and no sugar at all, so it might be something that I switch these three over to. I have tried it in the past with the pasture horses, but with them kind of juggling around each feed bin, I want to make sure they are getting what they need, and that is just a little bit harder when the volume is so small. These three boys will continue to get the majority of their forage in the grass hay with just a tiny little bit of alfalfa. Something I've noticed recently is that I think Big Gus has maybe taken over part of the responsibility for their little herd. He has been getting his grain first, and he gets the #1 spot along the rail for the hay bags. After I get the rest of this ration balancer in the barn, I will show you guys how I mix up the perfect mash for these old horses that are missing some teeth. Prim is the horse that gets the most upset about her dinner not being on time. I was going to give her a bag of this hay, but I think I'm going to clean up all this loose hay on the ground for her. This is just the stuff that falls out of the net as I'm preparing it for the other horses. Ziggy looks pretty content to munch on his food that he has outside, so I'm going to leave him there until he's ready for his real dinner. I thought it would be a really good comparison to show you guys how much it costs if you're feeding straight up complete senior feed. This is a really common feed to give to old horses that cannot chew anything anymore. This feed is pretty convenient because it's the only thing you have to feed your horse, but it is very expensive. Depending on where you get it, it's around $30 a bag. The instructions say to start the horses out at 12 pounds a day. which would end up costing about $2,500 a month. That is, of course, only if your horse can survive on 12 pounds, and I found a lot of horses need significantly more than that to keep their weight on. Every time I try a horse on senior feed, I just end up switching him back to my own personal mash. This is basically just a mixture of pellets, whether it's alfalfa or any other type of grass, and then beet pulp. It is a little bit dark in here, so I'm gonna get this bucket together for Frisco Bill's breakfast for tomorrow and then show you what it looks like. Here is the pellets. These are just straight alfalfa. They don't have any binders or wax or anything in them, no sugar. Most senior feeds have a ton of molasses in it to make it more palatable. For a horse with a metabolic disorder or insulin resistance, that can be very detrimental. So mixing up your own special senior feed is the way to go if you have a metabolic horse. This beet pulp that I'm mixing up is actually the shredded kind. I do use the pellets most of the time. The shreds are more expensive, but I have found that when I add the water to this mixture, there's a more even distribution. I use about 4 times as much water as there are pellets, and after 12 hours, it does look like this. There are no hard chunks. All of the pellets are completely broken up, so the risk of the horses choking on this are very slim. Even if your horse had no teeth at all, they could eat this pretty easily. The cost of this is going to vary, of course, by how big your horse is, but for Frisco, his meal costs him $3.88 a day. That bucket that I just showed you is just one of 3 that he gets. Once a day, he also gets this vitamin and mineral added to his feed. And then I do add a fat supplement in the form of rice bran to Frisco's food. As he gets older, he does have a little bit more trouble keeping the weight on, so he does need a fat supplement. Nigel stays nice and plump, so he doesn't get any fat added to his food.
You hungry, Nigel?
For Nigel's mash, since he's about a quarter of the size, he gets
Nigel.
about a quarter of the feed.
I'm coming.
Nigel was recently diagnosed
Nigel.
with PPID. He is on a special medication for it once a day. I did have Nigel on some senior feed this spring, and he did not look good at all. The extra sugar really contributed to some really odd fat deposits that he got all throughout his body. I know a lot of people think that horses will not eat just straight beet pulp and alfalfa pellets, but Nigel loves it. Another one of my horses that does get some rice bran is Ziggy. Ziggy is a lot hotter than some of the other horses, so I've just found that he really requires a little bit more fat in his diet than the quarter horses. Since I started feeding him about a pound a day, he really has started to look a lot more healthy overall. For now, I'm really liking the rice bran, but I might go back to a flaxseed oil. For a while, I was not able to get it out here in Montana, and it looks like it's available again, so it's nice to have 2 different options to choose from. Here is a side-by-side of the bagged senior feed, which costs about $2,500 a year to feed, and then my DIY senior feed, which is around $1,800 a year. It saves me around $600 a year, which doesn't really seem like much, but if you had like 10 senior horses you were taking care of, that would be a significant chunk of change. This DIY senior feed does require a lot of soaking, so for me in the wintertime, it's a little bit harder to do.
Come on, girl.
This year has been unseasonably warm, so I'm not having to worry about my mash freezing quite yet. But typically I do have to get it warmed up at my house and then bring it over to the barn when it's time to feed. It's not such a big deal because it's only 2 horses, but if I had a few more seniors, it would be kind of a huge task. One thing that I am really looking forward to when we finally buy a place is having a heated feed room with running warm water that I can use. If I make the mashes when it's cold at the barn, I do have a few little kettles that I use to warm up the water. For the alfalfa pellets, it does take quite a long time for them to break down completely, so it is a little bit tricky when it gets below freezing. Right now the weather is perfect. I can still leave Scarlet outside, which I've been doing as much as possible because she is getting quite sassy. This evening she was just a little bit hesitant about getting her halter on, and then she did not want to go through the door of the round pen. The neighbors were doing some construction and they were using a circular saw that was making a noise that she was not too excited about. Even though the sun was really starting to go down, I did take a few minutes to walk her across the bridge and around the property a little bit to kind of reset her mind. We have had our eyes on a place here locally that has been under contract. We're kind of waiting for it to sell to see if we're going to look at any more properties this year. It's a pretty cool place. It's got a barn and it actually has a small indoor arena, which would be really nice to get some of these horses worked at home over the winter. I honestly don't really feel like it's winter quite yet. I'm still just wearing my regular clothes. I haven't put any coveralls on. I know winter will eventually get here and I'm feeling pretty prepared this year. I've got all of my hay secured for the winter. I feel like I finally got my mash dialed in for Frisco and Nigel. Tiny seems to be pretty satisfied with how things are going as well.
Come on.
Really, the last thing I have to do this evening is get Nigel's little shed situated with some weight. I do have high hopes for this little tiny shed this winter. I'm hoping I'll get at least one season out of it before it blows away. With the heavy wooden frame that I put on the bottom, it doesn't seem to be moving much at all. We really haven't had any tests for it yet. The weather's been very nice and not too windy. Tomorrow we do have some wind coming in and it's supposed to snow, but it's looking like it's gonna be too warm, so I do think it's gonna be rain. After I get this thing weighed down, I am going to put some straw on the inside just to make it a little bit more cozy for Nigel. Typically this time of year I would have to start bringing Nigel inside, which he absolutely hates, so I think this will be a much better solution for him during the winter. Feeding this many horses through the winter can be a daunting task, especially when you have a few that are older and have some very special needs. You should always go over a new nutrition plan with your vet just to make sure your horse is receiving everything that they should. But hopefully this video gave you guys some ideas as to how to implement some new feeding protocols if you're struggling to keep weight on your horse in the winter. Thank you guys so much for watching and stay tuned for the next video.